After my dad died, Mom was left with nothing. His family took the house, the shop, and her dignity. But years later, she returned with a hidden goal because what they stole was never theirs. After my dad died, Mom was left with nothing. His family took the house, the shop, and her dignity. It was raining the day my father passed. Not just a soft drizzle, but a heavy, unforgiving storm, as if the sky itself was mourning with us. I remember sitting in that cold hospital room, my fingers numb, watching the heart monitor flatten with a slow, steady tone. My mom held his hand until it grew cold, whispering through tears, "Don't leave me alone." But he did. My father was a kind, self-made man. He built everything we had with his own hands, the house we lived in, the garment shop he ran for 20 years, the respect in our neighborhood. He had no enemies, no secrets. He loved my mother with his whole soul. And he loved me, his only son, like I was his greatest creation. But death doesn't care about love or goodness. It takes and leaves a vacuum behind. At his funeral, I noticed the way his brothers stood, too stiff, too quiet. They didn't look sad. They looked calculating. My uncle, Dad's elder brother, kept glancing around like he was already thinking about what would happen next. His cousins, the ones who used to come to our house on holidays and eat at our table, avoided our eyes. Mom was devastated. She didn't speak for hours. Her world had collapsed. But what we didn't know was, the real destruction was yet to come. The day after the funeral, Uncle arrived at our house with a heavy-looking file and a lawyer. Mom had barely slept. She still wore her black mourning sari, her eyes swollen from crying. She opened the door and stood silently, but Uncle walked right in, uninvited, like he owned the place. "We need to talk about the property," he said flatly. "The property?" Mom repeated, confused. "Yes. The shop, the house, the land. You know it was all under Dad's name. Technically, your husband didn't own it. It was part of the family inheritance." Mom's lips parted, but no words came out. Then he pulled out a file. "Also, your husband signed these documents before his illness." He handed control of the shop over to me. "It's all legal. You don't have to worry about anything." I saw the color drain from my mother's face. "What are you saying?" she finally whispered. "He never mentioned this. He never would." "I know it's hard to accept," Uncle interrupted. "But now that he's gone, it's better the family handles everything. You can stay here for a few days. But after that, well, we'll figure something out." I stood in the corner, confused and angry. It didn't make sense. My father had always said the shop would be mine one day. He used to say, "You'll grow it bigger than I ever could." Now, this man, his own brother, was telling us to move out? By evening, his cousins had arrived. They began taking inventory of the shop, unlocking cabinets, counting registers. One of them said out loud, "We'll have to redo this place. Make it more modern. This old setup won't work." Mom sat on the living room floor, frozen. They weren't mourning. They were dividing. Over the next 2 days, we were slowly pushed out of every corner of our own life. The shop's nameplate was removed. Locks were changed. The house we had lived in for 17 years now had new curtains, new furniture, and new rules. We weren't allowed in the kitchen. We were asked to stay in the guest room. My mother was no longer spoken to as Bobby G, but as the widow. And then came the final blow. Uncle told us, "We need the guest room too. My son is getting married next month. There's no space. You understand, right?" My mother didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the floor, her hands clenched tightly together. That night, she packed 2 small bags. One for me, one for her. No shouting. No begging. No crying. We stepped outside our own home in silence. The door closed behind us. And with it, the last thread of what we once called family. The night we left, the sky was dark, but it wasn't raining. No thunder. No lightning. Just silence, and the soft sound of my mother's slippers scraping the road as we walked away from everything we had ever known. Behind us was the house my father built, now filled with laughter that wasn't ours, people who weren't mourning, and relatives who had turned into strangers. Ahead of us? Nothing. My mother's hands trembled as she held the handles of the worn-out suitcase. I held her other hand tightly. I was only 15, but I remembered trying to act like a man that night. I told her we would be okay. I didn't believe it, but I said it anyway because she needed to hear it. We spent that night at the train station. We found a quiet corner near the back wall, beside a broken vending machine. Mom took off her shawl and laid it down so I wouldn't have to sit on the cold floor. I refused and placed my school bag under her instead. She smiled weakly and let me. Neither of us slept. That night was the longest night of my life. The next morning, we went to a government shelter. It wasn't much. A tin roof building with peeling paint, shared bathrooms, and old wooden beds that creaked even when you breathed. But it had a roof, and for now, that was more than we could ask for. Mom didn't cry after that. Not once. She woke up early, tied her hair tightly, and began asking around for work. Within 3 days, she got hired at a small garment factory a few kilometers away. It paid almost nothing. The work was brutal, 12-hour shifts, barely any breaks, but she took it without hesitation. Something is better than nothing, she said when I tried to stop her. At least this way, we won't starve. I wanted to quit school. I told her I'd find a job, maybe clean shops, deliver newspapers. But she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "No. Your education is the only thing that can save us." So I stayed in school. But it was hard. Kids whispered about me. Teachers pitied me. I hated being the boy whose father died and whose family threw him out. I stopped talking in class. I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. But I never stopped going. Because I had promised her. Every night, when she returned from work, I would massage her feet. Her hands were always raw from sewing. Her fingers had tiny wounds. Yet she never winced. She only asked about my day, what I learned, who I talked to, what the teacher said. It broke me. But she never broke. There was one thing, though, something she did every night that I didn't understand. After dinner, she'd sit cross-legged on the floor, open her small tin trunk, and carefully take out a folded paper from an old envelope. She would stare at it for minutes, sometimes longer, then quietly fold it back and place it beneath her pillow. I asked her once, "What is it, Amma?" She looked at me, then back at the envelope, and said, "Your father's truth." I didn't understand. Not then. One evening, weeks later, I came home early from school and found her crying, not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears. She was sitting alone on the floor, staring at an old photo of Dad. I sat beside her. "They didn't just take the house," she said. "They took his pride, his legacy, and they tried to take mine." I asked her why she didn't fight back, why she didn't scream, why she didn't take them to court. She smiled, but it was a tired, hollow smile. "If I had shown them the will, they would have torn it up," she whispered. "Your uncle would have bribed the officials, forged new documents, and claimed everything anyway. I had no money, no lawyer, no one to trust. So why keep it?" I asked. "Because one day," she said, "you will be strong enough. And when that day comes, we'll take everything back. Not with rage, not with noise, but with proof and with power." That was the first time I saw the fire in her eyes. A silent fire. The kind that doesn't burn fast, but never goes out. Years passed. Mom never remarried. She never complained. She just worked, saved every rupee she could, and focused on one thing, my future. Her hands became rough like sandpaper from the endless sewing. Her eyes grew tired, but her fire never faded. She stitched from sunrise to nightfall, surviving on tea and broken dreams. Yet, every night, she took out the same envelope, the one she called Your father's truth. When I turned 18, I got a scholarship to a law college. I was scared to leave her alone, but she pushed me forward. Go, she said, and don't look back until you're ready to return with power. I took that envelope with me. On my first night in the dorm room, I opened it. Inside was my father's last will and testament. Signed, witnessed, dated. It stated clearly, all property, savings, and business were to go to his wife and son. I sat frozen on my bed. All these years, my mother had carried this truth quietly, while my uncle built an empire off stolen ground. He had forged signatures, lied to the community, and destroyed us with a smile. But now, the truth had a witness, and I was ready to be her weapon. Mom always said, let your silence collect strength, not bitterness. And that's exactly what we did. While the world thought we were just another forgotten widow and son, we were slowly rebuilding ourselves, brick by brick, day by day, in complete silence. In college, I wasn't just studying law. I was studying our enemy. I spent long hours in the library going through property law, inheritance rights, legal loopholes, and most importantly, cases of forged wills and stolen estates. I volunteered at legal aid centers and took internships under senior advocates who dealt with estate fraud. Every case I touched reminded me of what they did to us. But we weren't ready yet. Mom still worked at the factory. She saved every rupee she could, still living like we had nothing, because in her eyes, we didn't want pity money, we wanted justice. And justice needed more than anger. It needed proof. One day, while searching through an old storage unit where Dad once kept files, I found receipts, contracts, and personal letters written in his own handwriting. Some of them directly contradicted the lies my uncle had told in court when he forged control of the shop. Even more powerful, I found two witnesses, Dad's old friends, who clearly remembered him saying he had made a will for his wife and son. They recalled the day he got it notarized. One even had a photo of him signing it at a local lawyer's office. My hands shook holding that photograph. It was the key we'd been waiting for. I showed Mom everything that night. She said nothing at first. She just held the photo to her chest, kissed it gently, and whispered, "Your father was never weak. I just had to wait for you to be strong enough to carry him forward." And then, something inside her changed. The quiet sadness in her eyes was replaced with calm fire. She folded the photo, the will, and the testimonies into a new folder. She tucked it into her drawer and locked it. Then she said the words I had waited years to hear. "It's time." We met with a lawyer I had worked under during my internship, a man who knew the law inside and out. When we showed him the will and supporting evidence, his first reaction was silence. Then he looked at me and said, "You've done your homework. And your mother. She's a queen for surviving all this." The case would take time. My uncle was well connected, had power, money, and influence. But what he didn't have anymore was the truth. And truth, no matter how long it sleeps, always wakes up with a roar. Life has a strange way of bringing you full circle. Just when you think time has moved on, it sends a reminder that the past still waits, still breathes, and sometimes it arrives wrapped in gold-trimmed envelopes. That envelope came to our rented apartment on a quiet afternoon. My mother was folding clothes, and I was reviewing case files when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a delivery boy holding a thick cream-colored envelope with our names written in cursive. It was a wedding invitation. My uncle's daughter, my cousin, was getting married. The same cousin who once played with me in the courtyard of our old house now lived in it like it was always hers. And now, they were inviting us? I looked at my mother. She didn't blink, didn't frown. She simply took the card, turned it over in her hands, and said one word. "Perfect." I stared at her. "You want to go? After everything?" She met my eyes calmly. "We've stayed silent for 10 years. They think we vanished. They think we're weak. But this is our moment." And just like that, we knew this wedding would be our battlefield. In the following days, we prepared not dresses, not gifts, but documents. We compiled the notarized will, the witnesses' statements, the photo evidence, and the legal notices that were ready to be served. We made extra copies. Our lawyer assured us this will be the beginning of the end for them. The wedding was hosted in the same house we were thrown out of. The gates were decorated with flowers. Lights hung from every wall. Laughter echoed through the courtyard that once held our pain. Guests walked in with expensive clothes and polished shoes. People who had once ignored us now barely recognized us. But we walked in like shadows of truth. My mother wore a simple white cotton sari, no jewelry, no makeup, just dignity. I wore a black kurta and carried the folder in my hand like a sword. And then we saw him, my uncle, dressed in a three-piece suit, holding a glass of champagne, smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong. He spotted us. His smile faded for a moment, then returned, this time thinner, sharper. Well, well, he said, walking over. Didn't expect to see you here. Brave of you to come. My mother didn't flinch. She reached into her purse, pulled out a brown envelope, and handed it to him. He raised an eyebrow. What is this? A gift? No, she said. A memory. One you tried to erase. He opened it, pulled out the will, scanned it, and for the first time in years, I saw his hands shake. My voice was steady. We're not here to bless the bride. We're here to wake the dead truth. The lights twinkled. The music played on. But the war had already begun. The courtroom smelled like old paper and dusted pride. But to us, it smelled like the first breath of justice. Our case was officially filed 2 weeks after the wedding. My uncle tried to delay it. His lawyers sent letters, filed objections, made phone calls to people in high places, but the documents we had were solid. The will, the witnesses, the signatures, every piece of evidence was real and undeniable. The judge was a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s. As she entered and called the case number, I looked at my mother. She didn't blink. She sat still, composed, dressed in the same simple white sari. This wasn't revenge for her. This was resolution. My uncle walked in wearing a dark blue suit and fake confidence. He had 3 lawyers beside him. They looked smug. I wasn't surprised. He'd always relied on power, never on truth. The hearing began. His lawyer stood up and said, Your Honor, this so-called will is fabricated. The deceased, Mr. Amar, was not in the mental state to sign any documents before his death. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof? No, Your Honor, he replied. But we have doubts. Then our lawyer stood. Your Honor, we have not just the original will, but also 2 verified witnesses, both of whom were present when the will was signed and notarized. We have a photograph from that very day. We also have handwriting analysis confirming the signature matches Mr. Amar's other official documents. The judge looked over the papers. There was a long pause. Then she spoke. The evidence is compelling. And more importantly, the defendant has provided no valid reason to doubt its authenticity. This case will proceed to full trial. My uncle's face paled. His lawyer whispered something to him. He shook his head. That was just the beginning. Over the next few hearings, our witnesses gave calm, clear testimony. One of them said, I remember Amar telling me, I know they will come after everything once I'm gone. But I want my wife to live with dignity. The courtroom was silent. Even my uncle avoided eye contact. He tried to counter with accusations. That we had planned all this to ruin his reputation, that my mother had manipulated my father, that the will was hidden for too long. But every argument fell flat. Because our truth wasn't just written on paper, it was etched in sacrifice. The final hearing arrived. The judge looked over all documents one last time. Then, in a calm, steady voice, she declared, all properties and assets mentioned in the will are to be returned to the rightful heirs, Mrs. Shanta and her son. The forged documents presented by the defendant will be investigated for criminal fraud. I looked at my uncle. For once, he had nothing to say. And my mother? She just closed her eyes. and finally breathed. The sun was setting when we stepped in front of the house we once called our own. It had been more than 10 years since we were pushed out of this gate, two small bags in hand, hearts shattered. But today, we returned, not as victims, not as beggars, but as the rightful owners. The legal handover had taken place that morning. The keys were returned to us by court order. The locks were changed under police supervision. My uncle had already vacated the property. His furniture was gone. The house was empty, but not hollow. It was waiting for us. Mom stood at the gate for a long moment. She didn't move. She simply stared at the nameplate. It still read, Amar Bhavin, my father's name. Faded, scratched, barely legible. But still there. Still holding on. I whispered, should I take it down and replace it? She shook her head. No. We'll restore it. Not erase it. Let the world see what tried to be buried but survived. We walked in slowly. The walls had cracks. The lights didn't work. Dust clung to every corner. But the house recognized us. I could feel it. It was like walking back into a memory that had been paused, waiting to play again. We started cleaning that very evening. Mom tied her sari tight and grabbed a broom. I swept the floors. We wiped the windows, lit candles, and opened every window to let the light in. Not a single worker was hired. We wanted to reclaim it with our own hands. In the bedroom, she opened the old cupboard. Inside was a drawer left untouched. In it, she found a faded photo of my father, the one from his last birthday. He was smiling, holding a small cake, his hand resting on her shoulder. She held it close, tears rolling down her cheeks, not of pain, but of peace. We're back, she whispered. And this time, no one will take it from us. The next morning, we opened the shop too. The name was changed from the flashy showroom title my uncle had given it, back to its original name. Amar Vastra Bhandar, where dignity is stitched into every thread. But this time, we added something new. A tagline on the board that read in bold letters. Truth always returns. Customers returned, some old, some new. Some came with guilt in their eyes. Some with admiration. We welcomed all. Mom hired 2 widowed women from the neighborhood to help in stitching. She said, no one else should live what I lived through. We didn't celebrate loudly. There were no parties. No press. No posts. Only quiet victory. Because when you rebuild something from ashes, you don't scream. You stand still and let the silence speak for you. It was a quiet evening. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the windows of the house that once witnessed our pain, and now, our peace. Mom sat on the porch in her old wooden chair, the same one my father used to sit in while reading the newspaper. She looked out at the garden we had replanted together, roses, tulips, marigolds, all blooming again from the same earth that had once been soaked in tears. I came and sat beside her, 2 cups of tea in my hand. She took one and smiled faintly. So, I asked softly, how does it feel to finally be home? She didn't answer immediately. She looked around, the old door that now stood repaired, the walls freshly painted, the new stitching machines humming gently inside the shop. Then she spoke. It doesn't feel like revenge, she said. It feels like remembering who we were before the world tried to convince us otherwise. I stayed silent. She continued. They thought throwing us out would erase us. They thought stealing from a widow and her son would go unnoticed. But you know what kept me going? I looked at her. That one day, she said, you'd be strong enough to return, not with fists, not with fury, but with facts. With dignity. My eyes welled up. I had spent so many years chasing justice, building arguments, fighting in court, preparing for war. But in that moment, it wasn't the victory that hit me. It was her strength, her unshakable silence, her refusal to become bitter. I reached into my pocket and took out the old will, now protected in a clear sleeve. I unfolded it gently and placed it in her lap. You carried this for a decade, I said. Through hunger, humiliation, and heartbreak. She nodded slowly. I carried your father with it, she said. Every day. Then she looked straight at me, her eyes full of fire and peace all at once, and said the words I'll never forget. What they stole was never theirs. And that was it. That one sentence held every moment of our pain and every second of our comeback. It was not just a line. It was a legacy. A week later, I framed the original will and hung it in the shop's front wall, not as decoration, but as proof. Customers often asked, "Is that real?" And we always replied, "As real as the fight behind it." We never saw my uncle again. But sometimes, at night, I imagine him walking past our shop, seeing the lights glowing, the signboard shining, the machines humming, and knowing deep in his bones that everything he built on lies had crumbled, and everything we rebuilt in silence had stood tall. Because in the end, truth doesn't knock. It walks in like it never left.